Hi, in this particular series of videos we're going to be working through the Edexcel higher tier, and this is the calculator version of the sample assessment materials too. If you follow the link below in the description you should be able to get through and be able to download this paper. The whole idea is that you have a go at the questions and then compare your answers against the answers that I put here. I'm going to aim for each video to be about 20 to 30 minutes long, so it'll give you the opportunity to work in a fairly focused way for about an hour. So we're going to crack straight on with question 1, and question 1, if you download the paper, deals with some ratio. Okay, now the thing about ratio is that usually what they'll ask you to do is to work out the values of each of the shares that people have got. Now in this particular case, the only information they give you is that Seth has got 18 more sweets than Frank. So let's just have a look at that from basics at the moment. So I'm just going to look at the first part of the sentence, and what it says is that Frank to Mary to Seth have got 4, 5 and 7 sweets. Okay, well that means if they were sharing 16 sweets, then Frank would get 4 sweets, Mary would get 5 and Seth would get 7 sweets. But they're not. They're actually sharing a lot more than that, because we need to be in a position where the difference between Seth and Frank is going to be 18 sweets. So the difference between Seth and Frank at the moment is 3, but actually we need it to be 18. So if you think about that for a moment, what I can do is I can actually, if the difference at the moment is 3, then I want that to be 18. So if it's 18, the difference between 3 and 18 is a multiplication of 6. So if I multiply each of these units by 6, or each of these shares rather, it means that Seth has got 42 sweets, and Frank has got 24 sweets, and actually the difference between 24 and 42 is going to be 18. So actually that answers this second part of the question, that Seth has got 18 more sweets than Frank. So the only thing we need to do is to work out the number of sweets that Mary has got. Okay, well if you remember, she initially had 5, and what we've done is we've multiplied each of these by 6. So if we also multiply that 5 by 6 as well, it means Mary must have 30 sweets. Okay, so we can write that out as saying that Frank equals 24 sweets, Mary equals 30 sweets, and Seth equals 42 sweets. Okay, I hope that's been all right for you. What I've done is, as you can see, I've taken each of these and I've multiplied it by 6 to get to 42, and I've kind of figured out that the difference between the two would be 18 if I multiply their shares by 6. And then to get Mary, I've also multiplied her share by 6 to get 30 sweets. Okay, so let's move on then to question 2, which is a fairly typical SohCahToa type question. So every time I see these sort of right angle triangles, it's either going to be SohCahToa or it's going to be a Pythagoras question. And in this particular case, it's not a Pythagoras question because they're asking us to work out the value of x, which is the angle. Okay, so with these types of questions, the easiest way is always to label up the triangle first. So I know that I've got x here. Well, the opposite to x, I happen to know, is going to be 5 centimeters, which is great. The longest side is the hypotenuse, and the side that's left is the adjacent. Okay, so the 2 bits of information I've got is I know the opposite, I know the hypotenuse, so the ratio that I would use is going to be the sine ratio, because the sine ratio means that I can write the sine of x equals the opposite over the hypotenuse. Okay, now in this particular case that's going to be 5 divided by 14. Now just remember at this point that what this is going to do is to give me the sine. It's not actually going to give me the angle, so I need to use inverse trigonometry to be able to do that. So what I would feed into my calculator is sine to the minus 1 5 over 14, and what that does is it tells the calculator to actually calculate the angle rather than the sine itself, and what I end up with is 20.92 degrees. Okay, it's always at this point when you've got an answer worthwhile revisiting the question itself, just making sure that you get all the marks available. It says to 1 decimal place. Now unfortunately, if you wrote this down, you would actually lose one of those marks. It's a 2-mark question, so you would get 1 mark for it, but not the full 2 marks. You need to make sure that you answer the question as it's been given to you. So to 1 decimal place, that's going to be 20.9 degrees. Okay, so let's move on then to question number 3. And question number 3 deals with an arithmetic sequence. There are a couple of videos on the channel on arithmetic sequences, so if you're not sure about anything I'm doing here, please do have a look at some of the other videos. And like this whole video really, it's always worthwhile stopping the video at each of the questions, having a go at them and seeing if you can then compare your answers. So with an arithmetic sequence, they're fairly straightforward. That to recognise the difference between each of the numbers is going to be 4. Now the 2 things I need is I need what's called the common difference, which I've got is 4, okay, and that equals 4. The other thing I need is something called the 0 term, which is basically where the sequence has started from. So this at the moment is the first term. The 0 term is the one below that, and if I take 4 away, that means the 0 term is 2. Okay, so if I write that out as an nth term of the sequence, I would write that out as 4n plus 2. Okay, and that's the answer to this particular question. Okay, so the next bit is quite common, very common sort of question that you tend to get with these sorts of arithmetic sequences, and it'll say, is 108 a term in either the sequence that we looked at before or a new one? Okay, well, you appreciate that this n really means the place. It's the actual, they call it the term, but it's the place. So if we look back at all of these, this is the first term, but I prefer the term, I prefer to use first place, second place, third place, fourth place. So in other words, what they're saying is that 108, if it's going to be in this value of n, this place, would be a whole number. Okay, so let's just check that out. So if we say 108 equals 3n plus 5, okay, I now need to find the value of n, in other words, the place that it is within the sequence. Well, if I take 5 away from both sides, I get 103 equals 3n. And I don't know if you can see that, but one of the tricks I've used before is that if these digits add up to a multiple of 3, then it means you can divide by 3. Well, in this particular case, they don't, so you can't divide by 3. So I'm going to say that 103 over 3 is not a value of n when n is a whole number, when n equals a whole number. Now, if that is the case, then it means that it doesn't appear in the sequence. Okay, so you can usually write a sentence, something like that. Therefore, 108 is not a term in the sequence. Okay, and that would answer the question thoroughly, and you would get your full marks for that. Okay, so let's move on then to question 4, where in this particular case we're going to be looking at speed, distance and time. And we've got quite a lot of information. I think with a lot of these questions, they tend to give you quite a lot of information, which, while it's okay, it doesn't really help you to answer the question. Okay, so it's fine to say that they're driving along a motorway, they see a road sign, the distance junction 8, average time, okay, all that sort of thing. Okay, so what it says really is that Lengther says we'll have to drive faster than the speed limit of 70 miles an hour to drive 30 miles in 26 minutes. And that's really the core of the question. What they're basically saying is this faster than 70 miles an hour? So take all of that away and really it boils down to this little bit here. So let's just have a look at that for a moment. What we're actually saying is that if we're driving a distance of 30 miles and we drive that distance in a time of 26 minutes, is that faster or slower than 70 miles an hour? Okay, well, if we have a look at the term miles per hour, that's a measurement of speed. Okay, so what we actually say is that speed equals distance divided by time. Okay, now I know there's various triangles and bits and pieces people use to remember that. However, for me, all I would do is I'd say miles is a measurement of distance, per means over, and hours is a measurement of time. So therefore it helps me to remember the formula for speed. Okay, so if I plug some information into that, it'll allow me then to say, well, the distance is going to be 30 miles. Okay, that's fine. Now the time is a little bit different because I've actually got 26 minutes, but I need it in hours. So you appreciate that 26 minutes is the same as saying 26 out of 60, okay, because there's 60 minutes in an hour. So 26 out of 60 will give me my value of the hours. And if I plug all of that into a calculator, you can do it in bits if you want to just show that. You can write 30 over 0.43 recurring, whack it into a calculator, and you're actually going to get 69.230769, and actually that series of numbers there is repeated. Okay, so in other words, Lengther actually is incorrect. So it's actually Lefner, not Lengther. So Lefner is incorrect, okay, because although it's fairly close, they don't actually need to go above the speed limit of 70 miles an hour. They can run along at 69 miles an hour, and they should still be able to reach their destination within the 26 minutes. Okay, I hope that's all right for you. Let's move on then to question 5. I'm very aware of the time. We're about 12 minutes into the video. We're going to be aiming, as I mentioned before, for about 20 minutes to half an hour. Okay, so this particular type of video is fairly standard for a frequency table, and in this particular case it's showing some information about the foot lengths of 40 adults, and it's asking us initially at least to write down the modal class interval. Well, whenever you see the word modal, if you read that as most, okay, so in other words, the most common, and the most common, as you can see here, is actually number of adults. 12 adults have got a foot length of between 22 and 24 centimetres. So actually the modal class interval for this is 22 is less than or equal to f is less than 24. Okay, and that will answer that question. The next little bit asks us to work out an estimate for the mean. In other words, the average foot length. Well, in order to calculate the average foot length, we need to know, firstly, how many adults there are. Remember that average or mean average is all about totals. So the number of average of adults is actually 40. Now, it does tell that as that in the text itself, but it is well worthwhile it tells us there, but it's well worthwhile just checking these numbers and making sure they add up to 40. Okay, so what we're saying initially is in the first row, we've got 3 adults have got a foot length of between 16 and 18. So the average length of those 3 adults is going to be 17. So to work out the total amount of foot length of those 3 adults, all added together, what we do is we could write another column here, which is foot length times number of adults. Well, the foot length I'm going to use is the average, which is 17. So 17 times 3 is going to be 51, okay? And all I would do is actually just, before I start working out my mean length, I'm going to need this information anyway, is I just work my way through this, making sure that I've got all of this information to hand and it's all ready for me. And like a lot of these questions, it does take a little bit of preparation, but once you've got the preparation and you're ready to go with it, it should be then a fairly simple and easy calculation. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm just multiplying the number of adults by the average value of the foot length in each of the class intervals. So in this one, the average value is 25, there's 9 adults, so 9 times 25 is 225, okay? Add all of that together, and in other words, this whole survey has measured in total 876 centimetres. So if you took all of the feet and added them all together, you're going to get 876 centimetres, okay? So in other words, the mean or the average, I'll write that down as mean average, okay, and that's going to be equal to 876 divided by 40, okay, and that's going to be 21.9. So to answer this particular question, it would be 21.9 centimetres. They haven't asked us to actually give it to any particular decimal point or anything like that, so I figure that will be okay for this particular question. Okay, hope that's been helpful to you. Let's move on then to question number 6, and question number 6 deals with Pythagoras. Before we had a SohCahToa type question. Well, you remember I mentioned before that if you see a right angle triangle, it's either going to be SohCahToa or Pythagoras. I'd say 99 times out of 100. So with this particular question, it's asking us to work out the value of x, which is the hypotenuse of this bottom triangle here. So what I'm going to do first is, in order to find this out, I need to have at least 2 sides. Well, if I have the first triangle, it'll allow me to work out this side along here, which is what I'm going to do, and then I'm going to use that information and that information to work out the answer to this one. Okay, so let's just separate these triangles up a little bit. I'm going to write a triangle here, which is the top triangle, and that's going to be A, B, and D. Okay, I know this is right angle, which is great, and that's 5 and that's 10. Okay, so if I just use a little bit of Pythagoras, I'll mark it up first. I normally say that the hypotenuse is A and the other sides are B and C. People might look at C squared and have C there and A and B, but generally that was the way I was taught and it kind of worked out for me. But I appreciate in these kind of situations you might have something slightly different to me. Okay, but hopefully you'll end up with the same answer, because what we've got is A squared, which is 10. Well, 10 squared is going to be 100, and that equals B squared, which is this one here, which is 5 squared is 25, and that is plus C squared. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave this as C squared, because actually I do need C squared when I come to working out this bottom triangle, which we'll go into in a minute. So if I take 25 away from both sides, it means that C squared equals 75. Okay, so let's now have a look at my next triangle, which is the bottom triangle here. If I just draw that the way that they've drawn it, okay, there's my right angle. This is X. Now this actually is C. Okay, so because C would be in the bottom here, which I worked out over here. Okay, now actually I know that's going to be 75 as C squared. So C squared equals 75. You could, if you wanted, write it out and work it out in your calculator and leave it as one long number, but I think for the purposes of the video and also just to show you how these sorts of questions work, you might as well leave it as c squared, because we can really, using Pythagoras, we can say x squared equals c squared plus 4 squared. Well, c squared we know is 75 and 4 squared we know is 16. Okay. If we then add those two together, we get 91, and that's going to be the value of x squared. Okay, so if I then square root that in my calculator, I get a very long 9.53939. Okay, and so it goes on. However, the question has asked us to give the answer to 2 decimal places. And again, I would try to encourage you always go back to the question, particularly where it involves using a calculator, and check how many decimal places or significant figures they want you to give the answer in. In this particular case, it's going to be 2 dp, so it's going to be 9.54 centimetres. Don't forget, I look at the second decimal place and decide whether I'm going to keep that as 3 or I'm going to change it. And the reason I'm going to change it is because this number is larger than 5. So rather than 3, I'm going to write 4. Okay, I hope you can see that in the bottom of the video. Okay. Alrighty, so we're on 21 minutes. I think it would probably make sense for us to go on to question 7. So I'm going to look with you at question 7. So as before, please do stop the video, have a go at these kind of questions. It is only a 3 marker, so fairly straightforward, but it's one of those questions where you either kind of know it or you don't really. These sorts of questions do crop up on a fairly regular basis, and usually they involve you either working out the roots or working out some value or drawing the negative values or something like that. I think actually later on in this paper there are some questions like this one as well, but let's have a look at the first one, and it says write down the turning points of the graph. Okay, so part A, write down the turning points of the graph. Well, the turning point is really just the point in which the graph turns back on itself, and you can see here that it's actually value of x coordinate is 1 and the value of y coordinate is 4, so the turning points of the graph are going to be 1 and 4. Okay, so the next one is write down the roots where the function of x equals 2. Okay, well, that really is the function of x is where it crosses this line along here. Okay, so you appreciate that at this point along here, this is where the function of x equals 2. Okay, so a function of x equals 2. Okay, so all the values, the 2 values at this point is where whatever this function is, it equals that value of 2. Okay, so if we look at a little bit closer inspection with that, what we'll see is that the roots, in other words, where that function is going to be minus 0.4 and 2.4. Okay, and then finally we've got write down the value where the function equals, or the function is 0.5. Okay, so all we do with that is we look at where the function is 0.5, which is this one here, and if we take this line up, it actually crosses, okay, at that point over here. Okay, and that's actually works out as 3.75. Okay, so this is where 3.75, and that's actually the answers to those questions. If you have a look at some alternate questions, there are some questions on my website. You might be able to get some practice in with these sorts of things. It seems worthwhile just trying to gain those 3 marks if you possibly can for these types of questions. Okay, so we're going to leave it there. We're going to move on from next week from next video from question 8 onwards. Please do have a look at the rest of the playlist. If you're not sure about any of the calculations or the questions that we've gone through so far, please don't hesitate to leave a comment below. I'll come back to you. Subscribe to the channel, and I'll look forward to seeing you inside the next video.